My name is Trinity Ray. I'm a board member on the City of Literature, and it's my honor to do the introductions today. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the book festival. I said that okay. So here's the list of wonderful neighbors and wonderful folks who make all of this possible. The City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa City Public Library, the beautiful building we're in now, Prairie Lights, our beloved bookstore, Iowa Public Radio, the Graduate Hotel, and Think Iowa City. Also, Iowa Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities, wonderful organizations. Okay, between events, be sure to check out Merge, which is just next door. That's sort of the HQ for this party. So there's a book fair and some other stuff going on over there. Encourage you to check that out. These events, as you are aware, are offered without charge, but they are not free. Please consider, if you can, donating to the book festival. You can do that at iowacitybookfestival.org and click support, or I think you'll see some QR codes around here too that you can scan. Today we'll hear from Nathan Hill. His best-selling debut novel, The Knicks, was named the #1 book of 2016 by Entertainment Weekly, and one of the year's best books by the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, Slate, and others. Pretty cool. Pretty good. The Native Iowan, also pretty cool and pretty good, returns with the new book Wellness, moving from the gritty 90s Chicago art scene to a suburbia of detox diets and home renovation hysteria. This new novel mines the absurdities of modern technology and modern love to reveal profound, startling truths about intimacy and connection. The novel was selected in September as the latest pick in some book club called Oprah's Book Club. I don't know, this could be good. Please join me in welcoming Iowa's own Nathan Hill.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming out today. I was born in Cedar Rapids and went to school at Iowa. I lived in Iowa City for 7 years. I always love coming back, seeing old friends and especially family. I want to acknowledge right away that this whole crew right here, this whole group, are all family who came out, and some of them drove many hours to be here today. And I grew up with these people, so please thank them for me. It means a lot that you're here. The last time, many of them I haven't seen since before COVID. And I feel like the last time we all saw each other was at a bowling alley where I feel like I held my own. So, yeah. Thanks everybody else for coming out. I'm in the middle of my book tour right now. My book came out about 2-3 weeks ago, and I'm in the middle of the whole thing. It's very exciting. You know, I get to go to some of my favorite cities in the country, some of my favorite bookstores in the country. It's all, you know, meeting readers is all very exciting. There's also it's also a very humbling experience too. You know, like the world will always humble you as soon as you get a little too big for your britches, and I had this experience a couple days ago, maybe a week ago now. I was in New York City. I was giving a reading in Brooklyn, and this young woman comes up to the table, and she must be like maybe 23, 24 years old, very hip, and she's like, I read this book. I really, really liked the sections in the 90s. And there's a long section in the book set in 1993, and it's like kind of the grunge era, and I was in high school and in college during that era, so it was a very formative time for me. And I was like, really, you like the section in the 90s? And she's like, yeah, I really like that. And I'm like, do you have an interest in that time period? She's like, no, I just really like historical fiction. Thank you. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. And then also, if you ever want to feel a little humble, you go check your own Amazon reviews, and that's a terrible idea. I don't often do that, but there was one recently that was like, Amazon delivered this 2 days late, 1 star. That happens a lot, and I was like, well, yeah, you can't. Why do you punish me for it? But you can't punish Amazon. You can rate everything on Amazon, but you cannot rate Amazon. So I guess you got to take it out on me. Like I said, I lived in Iowa City for a long time. I was a reporter here at the Gazette and the Iowa City Bureau for a long time. I feel like for my first year there, I was on the business beat, and I feel like I was basically just covering everything that was happening at the brand new Coral Ridge Mall that was opening when I worked this beat. But then I was also the politics reporter at the Gazette for a while. And Iowa is a great place to be a politics reporter, of course, because of the caucuses. And I remember I was covering the Iowa caucuses before the 2000 election. George Bush won those caucuses, but Steve Forbes was a close second. And Steve Forbes, you remember Steve Forbes? Steve Forbes was, he was bringing his campaign to Coralville. He was doing an event at a ballroom in a hotel in Coralville. So I went to cover it. And this is my favorite moment ever being a politics reporter. It was a very snowy night, very, it's like the fat flakes, falling. The roads were treacherous. And I go out and I cover this rally. And the exciting thing for me was, like, after the rally, the local reporters were going to be invited onto the Steve Forbes bus, where we could have a little FaceTime with the candidates and ask him whatever questions we wanted. So I was pretty psyched as a young reporter to be able to do that. And at the end of the rally, he gave his whole speech, and at the very end, this older gentleman stands up, and he just says, "Everybody be careful. It was on a night like this that Chris Street died." And everybody was like, yeah. And Steve Forbes had no idea what he was talking about. So an aide kind of whispered into his ear, and then Steve Forbes was like, "Right, and that's why in my highway bill, I have money for highway safety." And everybody was just like, "Okay," Anyway, so we get back onto the bus, and I'm invited to ask my first question, and I was like, "Do you think it was appropriate to respond in that very human moment with details about your highway plan?" And I was kicked off the bus. Like, one question in. My favorite moment as a politics reporter. I was also a creative writing student before I went into newspapers, and by dumb luck, I came to Iowa for its engineering program, but discovered its creative writing program. And I remember it was back when the creative writing program was up in EPB, the fourth floor of the English Philosophy Building. And I discovered somewhere along the way that the workshop students, this is before they were emailing, workshop students would photocopy their stories for critique for that week and put them in a certain closet on the fourth floor. And then other students would come pick them up for workshop that week. I discovered this, and so I would sneak into that closet and read the stories. And they only had enough stories for the other students, so I couldn't steal them, or else somebody would be without a story. So I would take them into the lounge, read them, and put them back. And I would do that for a few semesters. I just figured, like, these were the best up-and-coming writers in the country. It behooved me to know what they were doing. So it was almost a weird kind of I don't know. I feel like I got a part of the writers' workshop education just by sneaking in and being a scoundrel. I would like to read a brief excerpt from the new book, and then I'd really like to open it up for questions. My favorite thing about any of these events are the questions and the conversation with you all. So feel free to ask whatever you want. My favorite question so far on the tour, again at Brooklyn, Brooklyn was an eventful event. In Brooklyn, this 9-year-old, must have been only 9-year-old boy raised his hand. I was like, well, I'm going to call on him, and he said, "Forgive me, I haven't read the book yet." He's like, "But on the cover there's a triangle, and the triangle is my favorite shape. What is your favorite shape?" And ended up being a nice long conversation about shapes. So anyway, whatever question you have, I'm saying, is fine. This is a book. Wellness is a book about a marriage. It's about a couple named Jack and Elizabeth. Jack has grown up in the plains of Kansas, in the Flint Hills of Kansas. Elizabeth has come from an old money family in Connecticut, and they meet, both escaping their families. They meet in Chicago in 1993 in the kind of indie underground music scene in the grunge era of Chicago, and they fall in love immediately. I started writing this book, technically, I guess, 20 years ago, because it began with a short story. The first chapter of the book is a short story that I wrote when I was in my, I think, mid-20s, and I had just moved to New York City, and I had this tiny studio apartment in Queens, and the one window looked across a courtyard into this brick wall with just a bunch of other windows into other apartments. And I just had this thought, like, for a story where two people were kind of glimpsing each other through those windows and slowly, over the course of a winter, kind of becoming more and more interested in each other and sort of weirdly falling in love with each other just across the alley. And I wrote that as a short story and then forgot about it for many, many years until, like, 15 years later. And by then I was married and at a different stage in my life. And I sort of looked back and I just kind of wondered what would have happened to that couple? What would have happened to these people who, in my 20s, I thought were really romantic. In my 40s, I thought, well, they're really naive, like falling in love across a window. Like, who does that, And so I was like, well, where would this go if I pick this up and if the world got as weird as it has gotten these last 20, 30 years, what would have happened to that couple? So I decided to go back and write a novel about it. So the first section in this book is Jack and Elizabeth meeting. They see each other across the alley. They start falling in love. They have this fabulously romantic meet cute. And then the book flash forwards 20 years. And life has happened. And so I want to read to you the first chapter from 20 years later, 20 years after their meet cute. And I should say that my wife and I are inveterate renovators. We have now gutted and renovated 3 houses, and so much so that we're never going to do it again. Like this last one basically just broke us. Spiritually, so it's a 1905 house, and it's just like, oh, it was a bad idea. Anyway, so a lot of that renovation stuff, you'll see, made it into the book. Perhaps it was the frequent use of the word forever that made these meetings feel so fraught. As in, this is your forever home, a phrase invoked by builders and designers and architects and real estate agents whenever some costly new extravagance was proposed. The implication was clear. If this is the home you'll die in, maybe go ahead and splurge. Maybe go ahead and buy the real marble tiles rather than the bargain porcelain knockoffs. Maybe buy the actual reclaimed barnwood instead of the replica laminate distressed at the factory. Maybe build those cabinet doors not from cheap MDF, but from a premium exotic, like perhaps Ipe. It goes without saying that all parties involved took commissions and kickbacks on these materials, and so there were certain strong incentives vis-a-vis the upselling. Their forever home was a 3-bedroom condo in the north suburb of Park Shore in a building that would be christened the Shipworks after renovations were complete, so named for its original owner, a long-defunct boat-building company. The Shipworks was currently undergoing a full gut and restoration. The last time Jack had dropped by, the place had been reduced to nothing but its original iron shell. Their future condo was, right now, literally just air. Just a rectangle in the sky, 6 stories up, though that bit of sky was thoroughly defined and demarcated in the loan approval paperwork it had taken many tedious hours to complete. Renters all their adult lives, Jack and Elizabeth were finally becoming homeowners. Were finally putting down roots, was how their mortgage broker described it, which Jack quietly resented. He and Elizabeth had met in 1993, and it was now 2014, and he personally thought more than 2 decades in the city meant they were very, very well-rooted, thank you very much. They'd spent a whole afternoon reading and initialing and signing and notarizing loan-related affidavits, after which they were, at last, approved. And they'd celebrated by standing outside the construction fences and toasting what would eventually become the Shipworks. They were on the brink of home ownership, buyers of real estate that was not technically real, but was circumscribed and plotted with NASA-like precision somewhere within the 400 pages of loan application documents Jack carried under his arm. Signing the papers had felt like an order of magnitude more important than any other single thing they'd ever done. Even getting married, even having a child, required far less documentation and far fewer approvals than securing a mortgage for a condo that did not yet, per se, exist. They stared up at its general location. Jack thought that in previous generations, his job here would have been to scoop up his wife and carry her across the threshold. But of course, there was no threshold. And Elizabeth had no use for time-worn gestures. And anyway, Jack had never been big enough to carry anyone. We're going to be living right there, he said, pointing at the void their home would soon occupy and inflecting his voice reverently to give the moment its proper gravitas. Toby will grow up right there. Elizabeth squinted and frowned. I thought the condo was there, she said, pointing to an entirely different spot in the sky. Really? I could have sworn it was there. It was the first of many minor disagreements. It turned out when designing a full home from scratch, there are innumerable unanticipated questions, and Jack surprised himself at how much he cared about all of them. Like, for example, Elizabeth wanted to forego wall cabinets in the kitchen in favor of open shelves, an idea that struck Jack with the force of heresy, even though he had not once in his whole life given any thought to the subject of kitchen cabinetry. Open shelves, Jack said, appalled. Yes. You want all our stuff just, he waved his hands vaguely in the air, out? It would be beautiful. It would be embarrassing. No, look, she fetched her laptop and showed him a photo of such a kitchen. It was one of many hundreds of kitchen photos she'd collected and organized and tabulated, along with dozens of bookmarked web pages and saved YouTube videos. She had, as usual, done her Elizabeth thing, researching and attacking a subject from all possible angles. The photo Jack looked at now showed a kitchen with dark walnut shelves on which white plates and white bowls and white coffee mugs were tastefully stacked and nested among small pieces of whimsical art. It was a kitchen where most everything was either white or wood-toned, where all the dishes matched, where there were no greasy streaks on any surface, where the wide farmhouse sink was clean and empty, and where all typical kitchen implements, toaster, microwave, coffee maker, had been banished. It was a kitchen that seemed designed more for reflection and meditation rather than actual food prep. See, Elizabeth said, isn't that beautiful? Jack nodded. Okay, yeah, very nice, he said, trying to be diplomatic, but I suspect that has more to do with the $1 million budget than the open shelves specifically. They were sitting at the counter of their small, cluttered Wicker Park kitchen. Its generic sink water spot stippled and full of the dirty dishes neither he nor Elizabeth ever had much enthusiasm for cleaning. The refrigerator dotted with fingerprints from an 8-year-old who routinely forgot to wash his hands after playing or eating. The toaster atop a rubble of what must have been a quarter cup of burnt bread crumbs, the coffee pot with the more or less permanent bong water-esque haze on its once clear glass, the microwave with its interior red crusty canopy, the result of a generation of exploding tomato sauces. There was such a gap between their lives and the lives of people with open shelves. Let me offer a quick demonstration, Jack said, whereupon he stood and walked to the upper wall cabinet where they stored all the plastic plates and plastic cutlery and plastic sippy cups amassed during Toby's toddler years, along with the total madness of the Tupperware collection, an agglomeration of eclectically sized plastic containers and their occasionally respective lids, all jammed together so tightly that as soon as Jack opened the cabinet, one of the larger containers fell out and bounced hollowly on the counter, as he knew it would. This was followed by a kind of Tupperware cascade, as the pile lost its structural integrity and slid out of the cabinet and all over the floor in what ended up being a way more effective demonstration than Jack could have ever hoped for. He looked at Elizabeth. She stared back at him. She said, I believe I understand what you're getting at. What makes you think we could have open shelves? I said I understand. We need to be realistic, Jack said. I mean, do you really want all of this out for everyone to see? Okay, first, who's everyone? I don't know, guests. When's the last time we had guests? We sometimes have guests. And second, if we had open shelves, it wouldn't look like that, she said, gesturing at the mess on the floor. It would look better. We would be better. Which ended up being the basic philosophical divide between them, whether their new home should reflect their current reality or their future aspirations. Should it be designed based on how they actually lived or how they wanted to live? For Elizabeth, this new condo was a chance for all of them to upgrade, and not only their residence, but their entire modus. She wanted their new home to have, for example, an arts and crafts nook, even though nobody in the family had ever been particularly crafty. And she wanted a rec room for the playing of nostalgic, analog-type games like Parcheesi and Uno and Go Fish, even though Toby seemed interested in games only when he was watching other people play them online. And she wanted the new condo to be free of television, even though most nights she fell asleep in front of one. And it was hard for Jack to hear these things and not think that Elizabeth was externalizing all her irritations into the very architecture of their new home, baking her disapproval into the walls of the shipworks. "I want a fireplace," she said one night over dinner as they silently ate salads and scrolled through their phones' profuse feeds. "A fireplace?" he said. She nodded, like this, showing him the photograph on her screen, a picture from an architecture magazine, a middle-aged couple curled up in bed at night reading books, a crackling fire at their feet. This couple might have been in a log cabin. They might have been in the woods. They had the contented, untroubled expressions of people with well-thought-out retirement plans. "I'm not sure that's exactly our style," he said. "I love it," she said. "I want that fireplace. And also, I want to read more." "But you read all the time." "For pleasure, I mean, and not for work. And both of us, you and me, I want us to read lots more." "You don't think I read enough?" "I'm just saying, doesn't this look nice? Wouldn't it be fun?" He set his phone down and his fork, clasped his hands together, stared at her for a moment. "Is everything okay?" he said. "Of course." "You're not discontented?" "I'm fine, Jack." "Because it seems like you're discontented." "I'm really perfectly fine." "It's just all the adjustments you want to make to the new place, the open shelves, the no TV, the game room, your new minimalist aesthetic." "What's wrong with my aesthetic?" "It's not very recognizably us. It makes it seem like maybe you're unsatisfied, maybe a little unhappy." "I'm not unhappy," Elizabeth said, patting him on the arm. "Or, at least, I am not abnormally unhappy." "Not abnormally, what does that mean?" "It means I'm exactly as happy as I should expect myself to be at this stage of life." "And which stage is that?" "At the bottom of the U-shaped curve." Yes, of course, the U-shaped curve. She'd been mentioning that a lot lately whenever Jack prodded her in this way. It was a phenomenon well known among certain economists and behavioral psychologists that happiness, in general, over a lifetime, tended to follow a familiar pattern. People were most happy when they were young and when they were old, and least happy in the middle. It seemed that happiness spiked around age 20, spiked again around age 60, but bottomed out in between, which was where Jack and Elizabeth now found themselves, at the bottom of that curve, in midlife, a period that was notable not for its well-publicized crisis, actually a pretty rare phenomenon, only 10% of people reported having one, but for its slow ebb into a quiet and often befuddling restlessness and dissatisfaction. This was, Elizabeth insisted, a universal constant. The U-shaped curve pertained to both men and women, both the married and unmarried, the rich and poor, the employed and unemployed, the educated and uneducated, the parents and the child-free, in every country, every culture, every ethnicity, for all the decades that researchers had done this work. The science showed that people in midlife were carrying around with them all the time a feeling that was, statistically speaking, the equivalent of someone close to them having recently died. That's how it felt, she said. That's how far you were from your early 20s peak, according to objective measures of well-being. Elizabeth suspected it had something to do with biology, natural selection, evolutionary pressures millions of years ago, as it had been recently shown by primatologists that great apes also experienced the exact same happiness curve, which suggested that this particular midlife sadness must have provided some kind of prehistoric advantage, must have helped our ancient primate ancestors survive. Perhaps, Elizabeth hypothesized, it was because the most vulnerable members of any troop were the young and the old, and so it was important for them to feel happy and content and satisfied. The more satisfied they felt, the fewer risks they would take, and thus more of them would survive. Whereas those in middle age needed to feel the opposite, a great inner unrest, a turmoil so unpleasant that it made going off into the dangerous world seem preferable in comparison. There needed to be someone, after all, who got shit done. Elizabeth seemed to think this was comforting, that a midlife lull was more biological hardwiring than evidence of something specifically wrong with one's marriage or life. But for Jack, it was not comforting at all. It just confirmed his fears. All he heard was his wife was sad. "But I won't be sad forever," Elizabeth said. "Eventually, in our 60s, we'll both be exactly as happy as when we first met. That's what the science says anyway. And isn't that exciting? Isn't that something to look forward to?" "That's kind of a long time to wait, darling." I'll stop there. Thank you. And then the rest of the book is them sort of excavating, how did we get here? And then also a few hijinks as they sort of try to recover what they feel like they've lost. I hope you really enjoyed the book, and if you have any questions for me, I would be delighted to answer them.
Hello. It's working out. Thank you.
Thank you for coming back to Iowa City. So I'm a former newspaper reporter as well, and I'm currently 160 pages into my first real creative work.
Congrats.
Thank you. I feel like I'm 40 miles away, but, or more. What kind of things did you learn as a newspaper reporter helped you as a novelist? What are the kind of things that you used as a writer reporter fueled you to actually get something done?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think probably discipline. Honestly, it taught me discipline, how to write quickly and write when I'm not inspired. I remember when I finished undergrad, I was thinking about applying to MFA programs immediately, and I decided not to. I decided to write for a newspaper for a little while instead, because I feel like I needed to get better. I felt like if I went directly to an MFA program, it would be lost on me because I didn't have the craft down yet. I feel like I came to literature, came to writing maybe a little later than other people, and so I just felt like I needed to apprentice a little bit longer. And so the newspaper job really helped with that. With between the Gazette and the Associated Press, which I worked for a little bit, and a couple magazines that I interned for, in those 2 years I must have written more than 1,000 stories, and you write them when you're not inspired. You write them, you're covering a city council meeting that is dreadfully dull, and you got to try to make it exciting or at least interesting to a reader. I remember long city council meetings I covered about, for example, the library expansion we are currently sitting in, and that can be pretty dull. But how do you find the angle that will make it interesting for a reader? I think that I learned a lot about that. And then also there'd be city council meetings where 6 things would be on the docket. I knew I was going to write. I had room for 3 stories. I would figure out those 3 stories at the city council meeting and come back to the newsroom, and I'd have to file them all on deadline. So you write 3 stories all in 45 minutes. And it taught me discipline. It taught me how to try to be engaging. I would hear back from readers when they liked a story, and so it kind of gave me a sense of what people are looking for when they're reading. So I thought it was a really great apprenticeship, and I feel like I learned a lot from it, and it helped a lot. Especially writing a novel, as requires just a lot of time in the chair, even when you don't feel your best. You still got to push through and just kind of make it a regular practice. So being a journalist really helps with that.
Did you ever feel like when you first wrote and then you finished it or got closer to the end, did you ever feel like you grew throughout that experience, so you had to go back and kind of not wholly rewrite, but look over again at the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. That happened particularly with my first book, because it took so long to write. I feel like I was spinning my wheels for a long time trying to figure out what the story was, and it didn't help that it was a stupid long story, So it was the rough draft was 1,000 pages long, so of course it took me 10 years to write. And I would get to the end of the draft and then look at what I the not the beginning, because I write them out of order, but I would look at the stuff I wrote earliest, and I was like, well, this isn't nearly as good as the stuff I wrote the latest, and then so that I would take some time and rewrite that stuff, and then again, I would look back and I was like, well, this stuff now doesn't look good. It's almost like when you're renovating a house, it's like, you got these 4 rooms on the ground level, and you're like, they're okay, but then you do the kitchen, and you're just like, now the kitchen is amazing, but it makes the living room look even worse in comparison. That kept happening, and I kind of I was worried that it would be like a snake eating its own tail, that I would just never end. So eventually I just had to be happy with it, just accept what it was, and give it to an agent, give it to an editor, and let them kind of go to work on it. But I think there needs to come a point when you're like, okay, this is going to be good enough. It's never going to be perfect, but you have to release it eventually. A lot of my friends are becoming what's the term? I just lost it. When you're empty nesters, are becoming empty nesters for the first time, and giving away a novel sounds like when they describe, they're like, I love you, but you need to leave. It's it feels kind of like that. Yeah. Got a question here?
Was it difficult for you in the two genres of journalism and literary art? Because journalism, you have to constrict, you have to get every essential word down.
Yeah.
I can give you a discipline, but a novel, you have to be expansive, not constrictive. Was that a problem, a difficulty of adjustment? Because you want you don't have to write a novel like Tolstoy or Dickens, which goes on and on, but at least you have to have something of moderate size for the 20th century.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think if you look at my Amazon reviews, a few readers would prefer me to be a little more concise. They are very different disciplines. You're right about that. And whereas newspaper reporting is about the who, what, where, when, why, novel writing is about trying to find some emotional truth that somebody will latch onto, like some kind of gap for their minds to cross. Like with journalism, you want to give them everything. With novel writing, you want to give them just enough that their imagination can kind of cover that abyss and fill it in, which is when a novel really feels alive to you, is when your imagination is doing that, So there's a certain way that you have to pull back, a little bit from maybe your journalism training and not do so much and just give just the details that's going to spark the imagination. And that's really, I graduated from my MFA program in 2004, and the Knicks didn't come out to 2016. So it just took a very, very long time to learn how to do that correctly, So it's just a lot of, like anything else, it's a lot of practice and a lot of craft and a lot of reading and a lot of, getting your butt kicked, until you figure it out. But yeah, you're right. They're very different. I think what journalism helped me most with was not in the actual sentences, but much more in the discipline to be able to write them consistently and write them every day.
When you were last here, I drove you to the airport.
Oh, hi.
And we talked about the first book, and you were in the process of selling the movie rights, as I recall.
Yeah.
So what happened, and where are you on all of your projects?
Oh, that is a tale of woe. No, it's not. In fact, I mean, it's depends on how you look at it. We were kind of full steam ahead there for a little while, and it was super educational for me. The studio that was wanting to produce it hired a screenwriter named John Logan to help with the writing, and I had not written a screenplay since I took a class on it in grad school. So I was just like, I'm gonna let somebody else do this, and John came on. And if you don't know John Logan, he was a writer on Gladiator. He wrote The Aviator. He did the Sweeney Todd adaptation. He's written a couple James Bond movies. The guy's a legend, and an amazing collaborator. And I told him that I wanted to be kind of close enough to the process to learn how to do it. And he was so great at that. And we really went over the book together. And in fact, I went out to LA and worked with him and his producer and writing assistant to break the entire novel. So we had not storyboarded, put all the scenes up on note cards on the wall, every twist and turn, every cliffhanger. It was super educational to see how a master of that very different craft does what he does, I think it really helped me. Screenwriters are so good about getting to the heart of a situation quickly, getting to emotion very quickly, so the writing of it was tremendously educational. The producing of it, it got interrupted by a few unforeseen things. We thought we had it at a studio, and then the studio's leadership changed and reshuffled, and then the producers that we had been working with, left for other jobs, and it was kind of orphaned at one studio, and then we took it back, and we were trying to put it at another studio, and COVID happened. And then Hollywood shut down for a year and a half. So. My agent remains eternally optimistic, but I'm mentally moving on to other things. But who knows who knows what could happen.
Hi.
Hi.
So I've heard two pieces of writing advice recently that seem kind of contradictory to me. so I want to hear what you think.
Okay.
The first is to write what you know, and then the next is write what scares you. So do you think you fall into one of those categories, or just what are your thoughts?
I think they can both be true at the same time, right? I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I know that I write. I often write in order to like engage with stuff that bothers me or confuses me. You know, like if I know absolutely what I think about a thing, it's kind of hard for me to write something that feels electric. You know, like I have to like be figuring it out on the page a little bit. You know, so I do write in a kind of exploratory way. Was anybody at John Irving's event last night? Yeah, he was talking about this a little bit, and he was essentially making strong fun of exactly how I write. He was just like he was like, you know, like you should know exactly what you're doing all the way through, and don't let your your characters tell you what to do. And I'm like, that's what I do, but it works for me. So I feel like the thing I think that's misinterpreted about the write what you know thing is that doesn't necessarily mean write autobiography or write what's happened to you or write from your particular experience. I think you can write about whatever you want, but if it's outside of your experience, you have the burden of figuring it out and becoming authoritative on that thing. So in this book, one of my characters is a psychologist, you know, and that's not something I studied, but I read enough psychology for this book to at least earn a bachelor's degree, at least, you know, in order to get it right, you know, and like, and then similarly with Jack, he's an artist, and he specializes in a very particular kind of abstract photography, and you know, I created a photo studio in my garage in order to be able to recreate what he did, so I could describe it better. So I didn't know how to do those things before I wrote them, but they seemed appropriate for the book, and so I learned about them, you know, and so I think write what you know means that, you know, write about whatever you want, but have authority over it, you know, and even if it's outside your experience, you can still do it. And then write what scares you. I don't know, like, I think that's good advice. I would. There's actually a screenwriting podcast I would direct you to. It's called The Screenwriting Life, and they have this one episode where it's just Google lava. The screenwriters talk about like writing as a thing, like where you kind of dip into your emotional lava, like the stuff that's always, you never look at it, you never think about it too much. It's just like but that stuff that can make you cry just because it happened, you know, that stuff is your lava, and like they talk about like dipping into that every once in a while during your process. And that's probably right, you know, right about what scares you, but that's also where the big energy is, you know, so I'd say yeah, go for it. Listen to that podcast. It's very good advice. Yeah, come on here.
So my favorite shape is a star.
It's a good shape. It's a good shape. Really good shape.
But I was a little uncomfortably like Elizabeth, having more cleaner aspirations. But we're only 2 years from 60, so you know we're
super happy.
But I received Book of the Month.
Yeah.
And so do you want to talk anything about that? Because I think that's super cool.
It was super cool, yeah. So the Book of the Month Club sends out this box of books, and, you know, is it monthly? It's monthly, every month. And wellness was included in the most recent box. I went to their offices. So their offices are on 27th Street in Manhattan, and I was coming up from DC, got off the train at Penn Station, and walked with my bag to their offices, all sweaty and gross. And they were just like, "Great, now it's time to record you for our podcast." So I'm going to be on their podcast. So check that out. I think that was really, really fun. And the really funny thing that they told me was that a couple years ago they forgot to add a scary book to the October box, and they heard about it. Like, people want scary books in October, so now every year they are sure to do that. As for shapes, I think my favorite shape, at least for the time being, is also a triangle. The cover of the book is a triangle, and you see there's a couple inscribed into the triangle, and I like it for two reasons. One, if you kind of let your eyes look at it more three-dimensionally, it's almost like they're on a red carpet receding into the distance, and it's like they're at the beginning of this very, very long journey. But that's not what my designer thought. When I asked him why he used the triangle, he said he thought that the triangle, of all the primary shapes, the triangle was the most sinister. That if there's a cult, their logo will probably be a triangle, and he thought this marriage was like a cult of two, so he put them in the triangle. I was like, that works too. I like that too. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. It's good to see you.
You too.
My question, I could be the only person in Iowa City. I am not a writer, so. I was, but not anymore. But my question is, the editing process, how different, and it could be this book or the Knicks, because obviously the author is the one on the book, it's your ideas, but how does that process, because all I know is the newspaper editing process, which is probably very different. How different is the novel when it comes out from when it went in?
Yeah. This, by the way, is Jim. He's selling himself short. He was also a newspaper reporter at the Gazette when I was at the Gazette. I feel like we looked at each other over a cubicle, right? You know. There's a cubicle between us, and I would listen to your interviews and learn how to interview by listening to you. The editing process is very different, you know, from newspapers as you would expect. You know, like I remember Lyle, our editor, would, you know, you would kind of like watch him as he would like go through your prose and be like, nope, change, nope, change, nope, change, and okay, now it's all right, and send it on. You know, would often happen. And with the books, there's like a kind of two steps of editing. There's the primary editorial stuff, and that's you know, that's just story shape and energy and drama and emotion. And my editor is very good in that she never tells me like what to do. It's more she reads as a very engaged and helpful reader who can point out things and then in a way that allows me to solve them, like point out problems that in a way that allows me to solve them. So she won't say, you know, cut this paragraph. She'll say, I feel like the energy on this page dips a little bit somewhere. Have a look at it, take another look, and then I'll take another look and like try to fix that, you know. And so she sort of like directs my gaze to potential problems. And you know, like you know, she had this great idea that that this forever home that Jack and Elizabeth are buying in the chapter I just read, they've had this nest egg kind of in the bank for a very long time, and they decided to use it all to fund this new home. And that was her idea. That's like, let's make it feel more dangerous. Like their nest egg is now gone, so this has to work. And that was not in the original draft. So she had, you know, ideas like that about like how to amp up the pressure a little bit. And then after she's satisfied and I'm satisfied, it goes on to copy editing, and I hate copy editing. Like I feel like by now I am an okay writer. Like I sort of know how to do it. And my copy editor came back with 11,000 changes on my manuscript. 11,000. We had fundamental differences about how to use a dash, for example, you know, like and where in a sentence certain commas should go. We just did not see eye to eye, comma wise. And also this particular copy editor, you know, was similar to maybe in journalism, where you want your sentences to unfurl in a very sort of logical and comprehensible way. But I like to write sentences that kind of move around a little bit. I like to like write longer sentences, and I like the way a longer sentence can kind of keep its punchline until the end, depending on what you do with certain clauses. And my copy editor, who I'd never knew this person's name. They would not let me know who was doing this. Probably because most writers feel this way and they would like want revenge or something. Would often like change sentences so that they were more kind of standardized, but then it like my own kind of rhythmic quality would go away. So I had to change most of them back, you know, to the way I wanted them. But copy editors are also like really, like in my first book, I remember there was this copy editor who noticed that on page 200, this house in Norway was a red house, but on page 740, it was a salmon red house. And do you want to say salmon red over here? And I was like, yeah, I do. Thank you. So they do notice like continuity, things like that. That's really, really helpful, but I just don't like it when they change my dashes.
This has been delightful. Thank you so much.
It has been delightful.
I'm really interested in the psychology angle. So I'm a behavioral psychologist. But I loved how you told us about how this grew from a short story.
Mm-hmm.
So you're thinking about how this couple is going to, how did the psychology piece come in? Was this an opportunity to explore that in a specific context?
Yeah,
or did it come in a little more gradually?
No, it was what I like to do is kind of take a central theme and sort of fragment it and look at it from different lenses. And I knew that this book was kind of about the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and how our worlds are really built on like the stories we believe about those worlds, And I was thinking about that because this couple fell in love because they were inventing stories about the other and then believing those stories, So I knew it was about storytelling and belief, And I had the idea that wouldn't it be interesting to introduce some psychology about for example, the placebo effect, I have a sort of long-winded answer to this, but placebo is from an old Latin word that means to be pleasing, but we know it. We know that term because of 14th century funeral practices. There were people who were paid to mourn at funerals, and they would sing this one psalm, Psalm 116. That was the first song in a particular funeral rite. And the first line is "Placebo Domino in Regione Vivorum." I will be pleasing to the Lord in the land of the living. And so placebo got caught up in this idea of to be pleasing, but also to be fake, because these people were pretending to be sad, but were not actually sad. They were doing it for money, right? And my main characters are doing the same thing. They have twisted themselves up to be pleasing. They've tried to please parents, they've tried to please each other, they've tried to please culture's expectations of them, and it's making them a little miserable. And so, like, thematically, it seemed like it worked really well. So once I realized that, I'm like, well, hell, okay, now it's time to read a lot. So I just read everything I could find about the placebo effect, and it was just super fascinating. And I was so interested in it that I was like, just assumed all of you would be too. So there's just so much in there. So I'm sorry if you're bored with it. I'm really sorry about it. But it was just like I felt like a kid showing off toys. I was like, look what I have, Yeah.
This isn't a question, but I just wanted to say thank you for all the scenes involving the prairie. I thought that they were especially beautiful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was writing this book mostly during a lockdown where I felt really kind of claustrophobic. And in my life, the landscape that I most associate with like openness is the Flint Hills in Kansas. I lived in Iowa City for like 7 years, and during that entire time, my parents lived in Wichita, Kansas, and so every time I would drive to see them, I would go through the Flint Hills and would often stop, because it's so pretty. And so during lockdown, like I couldn't go out and see vistas, but I wanted to travel there in my book, so that's why it's there. And I find that it's like one of the most magical landscapes in the country, and we don't really know it. Like the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve now exists, but it's the last national park that we founded, and it was pretty recent. So it wasn't, and it's the only one that features the prairie. So it was only until very recently that we recognized the prairie as a legitimate landscape. So, anyway, thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Oh, here.
So yesterday, John Irving told the Daily Iowan, and then he repeated last night that in America we like to celebrate first-time authors and then tear them down at the second. And I worried about you when he said that, and I thought about that, and I wonder if publishers prepare young writers for that potentiality.
I don't know. There's a couple book reviews I would send you to that might be true. Yeah, I mean that happens. I mean, look, like with a debut author, it would be cruel to try to rip them apart. Better just to ignore them. That would just be mean. But second time authors is kind of fair game. So that's just part of the deal. One of the nice things about this book, like. There's just a little protection by Oprah Winfrey, as I was writing this book, you think a million times, like, are people gonna like it? Is anybody gonna understand what I'm doing? You worry constantly. So imagine what it's like when the very first person outside of your small publishing circle, the very first person who says, yeah, I really like it, is Oprah. It was like, it really calmed me down a lot. I was just like, okay, I think this is gonna be okay, But yeah, that happens, but it's also, like, as with the Knicks, I wanted to write a book that was very idiosyncratic, and like it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. So, and so if anybody doesn't like it, it's not necessarily because they're trying to tear down a second-time author. It's just not going to be for everybody. Every book doesn't find the right audience. So it's just that people are more willing to say it when the author is a little more established. Is all.
To the family section.
I like this. I've read both of them, and one of the things that I like is that you make it familiar to us, especially like as a family, because of the names you use,
yeah,
and the places you've been and the things you've done and that. So that's always neat. Thinking of coming home to Iowa,
yeah,
and what you see along the road, all that stuff in the Knicks, and the other thing is if you had a bestseller, the first one, and this one looks like it's on its way. Is that a daunting task to think of what your next one's going to be?
Oh, goodness. That's mean. That's mean. And here I thought we were family. Yeah, thanks. I do like to put little Easter eggs in all my books for like various so family and friends and people who know me will occasionally come across something and find it familiar. It's like kind of an inside joke that I really like. I really like to do that. The next one. Yeah, I don't know. After this one, I feel like I want to write a book that's like 250 pages and needs no research whatsoever. Just like this, I just want to do something completely different. But I don't know. Like I feel like if I'm really honest about it, like the pressure to like be a bestseller again is way less than the pressure of just like trying to like please one's own sensibilities. Like it's I think most writers would agree, like it's very hard and one has high standards. So it's already really hard. Why add bestseller pressure to it? So I try not to think about it too much, but I'd be lying if I wasn't like, the book opened its first week on the bestseller list, and I'd be lying if I didn't say there was a giant relief. I was like, oh, good, okay, it's at least 1 week, thank God, But yeah, it's I don't know, it's fine to think about sales when I'm on a book tour, but as soon as I start writing the next one, I won't be thinking about that anymore. Yeah.
So you've traveled all over the world. Where's your favorite place?
Iowa City.
Wherever you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. And naturally, Midwesterners are secretly, you're like, you're full of shit. The book tour the Knicks book tour took me all over the place. I toured for like 2.5 years for that one. I went to Australia, I went to South Africa, I went to Israel, I went all over Europe. Probably the coolest one was probably Norway. My mom's family comes from Norway, and it was fun to travel back, and that's where I first met John Irving, and because we just happened to be in Norway and in Oslo at the same time, and we have the same Norwegian publisher. That's how I met him, and then that was even before the Knicks came out. I was just there for a pre-publication thing, and months later, he emailed me. I didn't even ask him for a blurb. He just We met. He read my book unasked for, sent me a blurb unasked for, and it was the first blurb that I'd gotten. He just did it because he's generous, you know? So probably that, because it's Norway, it was John Irving. That was a dream come true. So, yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Is there's something small in this book that you really love or are extremely proud of, but it's so random that it never comes up in a Q&A like this?
I love that question. There is. Okay. Okay. So there's a chapter where Jack is going to the gym for the first time, and he's got his Fitbit and he's got his workout plan. And I describe the workout plan, so it's like, you know, he lifts moderate weights. And when I describe the workout plan, I say, between dashes, I say it's 4 sets, 12 reps, weight at 45%, the muscle's upper lifting limit, 60 seconds mindful resting between sets, do 2 to 3 times weekly. And then he realizes, oh no, that is the wrong workout. And so he does a different workout. And between dashes, I describe it as just 3 sets, lift until you fail, a weight at 85% the muscle's max, a 1.5 minute rest between the sets, exactly twice a week. And then he realizes, no, that is also wrong. And so he has a third workout, and I describe it as where you start with the weights that are lightest and ramp to the weights that are heaviest, lifting them 7 to 20 times each. The thing that I'm super proud about is when I describe each workout, I'm doing it in meter. So I was in Shakespeare. Shakespeare always writes in iambic, but he saves trochaic meter, which is the opposite of iambic. He saves trochaic for moments that are unusual. So fairies and witches get trochaic, and so I'm like, well, this is his first workout. This is unusual for him. So when I describe the workout, I'm going to do it in trochaic meter. You know, trochaic is strong weak. So like happy birthday is trochaic meter, or like hold your horses is trochaic meter. But then the meter all falls apart. And then his second workout is written in iambic meter, because it's the heartbeat meter, the da-dun, 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 da-dun. And it's a harder workout, so his heart is beating faster. And then the third meter is the most complicated meter there is. It's called anapestic meter. It's it's a weak, strong, weak, strong. And because this is the workout that is most complicated, I did it in the most complicated meter. Readers will never realize I've done that. Will never realize I've done that, but I do that all over the place because it's entertaining for me, and also I want to use these tools to try to get into new sentence structures and vary things up for you a little bit, so that maybe you don't realize I'm writing in anapestic meter, but suddenly the thing does change, the feeling of the sentence changes, and then it all falls apart once his workout falls apart, and hopefully you feel that on some level. Anyway, thanks for that question.
All right, well, we're coming to the end. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Nathan will be in the hallway to sign books at the Prairie Lights table. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.